Most disasters begin with fire, smoke, or some loud mechanical failure that tells everyone something is wrong. This one began with a number, a single calculation, a tiny mistake, and 69 people in the sky on July 23, 1983. A Boeing 767 took off with passengers, crew, and what everyone believed was enough fuel to finish the flight. It was a normal Air Canada flight. Nothing looked unusual. Nothing sounded unusual. But high above Canada, that airplane was slowly turning into a powerless glider because someone had made a mistake. Not a sabotage, not a bomb, not a leak, a math mistake. This is the story of Air Canada Flight 143. The plane that ran out of fuel in mid-air and somehow still landed. Air Canada Flight 143 was flying from Montreal to Edmonton with a stop in Ottawa. On board were 69 people, plus Doers crew members. The aircraft was a Boeing 767. At the time, it was one of the most advanced airliners in the world. Modern, efficient, reliable. The kind of airplane people trusted without thinking twice. But before the flight, there was already a problem. The plane had an issue with its fuel quantity system. The normal fuel gauges were not working properly. That meant the crew could not simply look at the instruments and know how much fuel was in the aircraft. So the fuel had to be measured manually. That alone was already unusual. But unusual does not always mean dangerous, at least not yet. Ground crew checked the fuel levels by hand. They used measuring sticks. They did the math, they converted the numbers, and that is where everything started to go wrong. The Boeing 767 was part of a new generation of aircraft. Using the metric system, its fuel had to be calculated in kilograms, but during the manual process, part of the calculation used pounds instead, pounds and kilograms. Two different systems, two different numbers. One very dangerous mistake. Everyone involved believed they were putting in the right amount of fuel, but they were not. The airplane needed much more than it actually had, and because the numbers looked acceptable on paper, Flight 143 was cleared to go. It took off, and for a while, everything seemed normal. Passengers sat quietly. Crew worked as usual. The aircraft climbed high into the sky. Nothing about the scene suggested disaster. But then, the warnings began. First, there was a fuel pressure warning. That was strange. Then, one engine failed. Imagine being on a commercial flight, and suddenly, one of the engines shuts down. That alone would terrify most people. But on Flight 143, it got worse, because after the first engine died, the second one died too. Now the aircraft had no working engines at all, no thrust, no power from the engines, no second chance. At 41,000 feet, the plane became a giant glider, and here's what made the key situation even more frightening. The crew had never truly expected this to happen. Commercial jets are not supposed to lose both engines because of fuel starvation in normal flight. There was no neat little checklist for this exact moment. No comfortable procedure for both engines dead, thousands of feet in the air, full of passengers. Everything became immediate. Everything became real. The cockpit changed instantly. Warnings, alarms, confusion. Then silence from the engines. A silence that should never happen in a jetliner. Captain Bob Pearson was flying the plane. His first officer was Maurice Quintal, and in that moment, they had to solve an impossible problem. No engines, no fuel, no time, no room for panic. They were losing altitude fast. The aircraft still had some emergency power through systems like the ram air turbine, but that did not change the core problem. The airplane was going down. The question was only where. At first, they considered their options. Could they make it to Winnipeg? No, too far, too risky. Then First Officer Quintal remembered something. Years earlier, He had served at a place called Gimli, a former Air Force base in Manitoba. It had a runway, not a major airport, not the planned destination, but it was land. And at that moment, land was everything, so the decision was made. They would try to glide the powerless Boeing 767 into Gimli. Think about how absurd that sounds. A huge passenger jet with no engines, trying to glide to a former military base. But the danger was not over, because even if they reached Gimli, another problem was waiting. What the crew did not fully realize at first was that part of that old airbase was no longer being used like a normal runway. It had been repurposed on that day. There were people there, activities, vehicles, a racing event. What should have been a safe emergency landing site had people on it, and now a silent airliner was coming in. No one on the ground expected to see that. No one would, because who expects a passenger plane with no engines to appear out of the sky? As the aircraft approached Gimli, another problem became clear. They were coming in too high, too fast. In a glider, that can be managed with certain techniques. But this was not a small glider. This was a Boeing 767. Still, Captain Pearson had one unusual advantage. He had experience flying gliders. That mattered, because in that moment, he understood something many airline pilots would never need to use in real life. He knew how to lose altitude without losing control. So, he used a maneuver called a side slip. It is common in smaller aircraft and gliders, but in a giant commercial jet, it was almost unthinkable. The aircraft turned slightly sideways to the airflow. That created drag. It bled off speed. It helped bring the plane down. Inside the cabin, passengers had no idea how close they were to disaster. They knew something was wrong. They could feel the tension. They could sense the strange silence. But very few of them could have understood what was truly happening. This plane was not flying anymore. It was falling with skill. It was gliding on borrowed time. And then the runway appeared. Gimli, the old base, the wrong place, the only place. The aircraft came down hard. The nose gear collapsed. The plane slammed onto the runway. Metal scraped. Tires burst. Sparks flew. The aircraft slid forward, racing across the pavement, while people on the ground scattered out of the way, and then it stopped. The silence after that must have felt unreal. A fully loaded passenger plane had just landed without fuel, without engines, without any right to survive the way it did. And somehow, everyone on board was alive. No one died. There were injuries, mostly minor, but there were no fatalities. A disaster that should have become a headline about death became a headline about one of the most unbelievable emergency landings in aviation history. The plane itself survived too. It was repaired. It went back into service. And from that day on, it became known by a name people would never forget: the Gimli Glider. That name sounds almost funny, almost harmless, but the story behind it is anything but harmless, because this was not a miracle caused by luck alone. This was a disaster built from small mistakes. Broken fuel indication system. Manual measurements, confusion between pounds and kilograms. A number written the wrong way. A unit misunderstood. That is what makes this case perfect for the line files. Nothing exploded at the start. No villain walked in. No dramatic storm tore the aircraft apart. The disaster began quietly, with math, with conversion, with a detail small enough to ignore, until it wasn't. That is how some of the worst situations begin, not with chaos, with confidence. Someone thinks the number is right. Someone checks the paper. Someone signs off, and the consequences do not appear. Immediately, they wait, they climb, they travel thousands of feet into the air, and then suddenly, 2 engines go silent. Air Canada. Flight 143 should have become a tragedy. Instead, it became one of the most famous emergency landings ever recorded. because when the numbers failed, the people in that cockpit did not. A small mistake nearly brought down an entire airplane, and that is why this story belongs in the Line Files.